Good morning, and welcome to another Veterans Forum. Like all the other past performances we've had, we have another guy here to tell his story, what he did, how he did it, and more important, what it may or may not have meant to each one of us. Today's guest, I'll introduce him quickly, then let him reintroduce himself so we get the show on the road. Brian Sweeney, a doctor, a Navy doctor. The show is all yours now, young man. Introduce yourself again if you'll spell your last name, date of birth, and no, but just your dates of service rather, and
Sure.
so on, if you will.
Great, thank you, Bob, and thank you for having me here. So my name is William Brian Sweeney. I go by my middle name, Brian. Last name is Sweeney, S-W-E-E-N-E-Y. I currently live in Holden, Massachusetts. And did you want my address there too?
No,
Nope.
that way the IRS won't get you.
Yeah. So Holden, Massachusetts. And my dates of service, as I swore in 1979 in July. It was after I was finishing college, and finished my active duty component in 1993. And I'm actually happy to say I'm a drilling reservist currently.
Oh, good.
Yes.
So a long time in the loop.
That is correct. Not always a drilling reservist after I got off active duty, and there was a time that I was sort of what's called the individual ready reserve, sort of on the list but not getting paid or drilling, and then I decided to start getting back with a drilling unit.
Well, like a QRT group then, huh?
That's right.
QRT for Quick Response Team. I'm learning all kinds of good stuff here.
Well, lots of acronyms.
Yeah, I know.
Between the military and medicine, we have a lot of acronyms.
I know. The only trouble is I can't understand most of them, but I'm always a patient, so I got to learn soon. Now, basically, you are a doctor,
That
a
is
surgeon,
correct. Mm-hmm.
okay? I'd like you, if you can, as we talked before, to go back and kind of where did you start and so forth. Like, where were you born, when,
Sure.
how about your family life, brothers and sisters, anybody else in the service? It's your show.
Thank you, Bob. I'd be happy to. So I grew up in northeastern Pennsylvania, a very small town called Sayre, Pennsylvania. It's right on the border of Pennsylvania and upstate New York, between sort of the Binghamton, New York, and Elmira, New York area. Small town. Basically, the town was a railroad town. It was in between Buffalo and New York City, and the Lehigh Valley Railroad went through there. And so my family were railroad people. My dad, my grandfather, my mom worked for the railroad. It was a big railroading town. And sort of as the town declined from the railroad side, we were fortunate enough that there was a hospital in the town called the Robert Packer Hospital and the Guthrie Clinic that started booming at about the same time that the railroads declined. The hospital was created for the railroads. And so in this small town, we had a very, very good medical center called the Guthrie Clinic. Anyway, I grew up in that town, went to high school there, and I say that, I guess, because that was my exposure to medicine. My parents both, again, on the railroad, and I have an older sister and a younger brother, and a lot of cousins in the area. Went through high school there, decided after high school that I thought, geez, you know, I like math and science, and I'm not really good in English and those other type of disciplines. And I thought, you know, engineering and perhaps medicine. We have a beautiful hospital here, and you know, I'm kind of attracted to the medical field. So I went to college in Scranton. University of Scranton had a good reputation for training for pre-medicine. And if you did a good job and could get through the courses, you had a pretty good chance of getting into medical school. So and Scranton was fairly close, a couple hours south of us in Sayre. Went to college there and stayed focused, and was fortunate enough in my senior year to apply to medical schools. And I got accepted to Georgetown and Hahnemann just before Christmas of my senior year in college. And they were very good medical schools. Georgetown, of course, is in the D.C. area, and Hahnemann was in Philadelphia. And I was particularly interested in Hahnemann because they had an affiliation with the Guthrie Clinic in my hometown.
Okay.
I know this isn't the military part yet, but it's getting there.
Well, it all leads into it.
Exactly. So I really wanted to go to Hahnemann because of the ability to affiliate and come back and rotate at the Guthrie Clinic. Well, Georgetown was the most expensive medical school at the time, and Hahnemann was the third most expensive medical school.
Now, I'm being nosy, but did they give you a scholarship or an award? Or did you have to kind of grant and trade or work your hours and they could pay back later, like the Navy routine?
Yeah, so for medical schools, there's not a lot of scholarships, and I didn't qualify for any aid or anything, and that was the crux of it at that point in my life. You know, I had loans for college, And my older sister was in college. My younger brother was coming along, and I said, I don't really want my parents to have to hawk the house to send me to medical school. And so I started looking around, and I heard that the military offered a scholarship program to medical school. That's one of the ways that they have to get physicians. And so I looked into it. It's called the Armed Forces Health Profession Scholarship Program. And I said, wow, this is a pretty nice deal. It's all tuition, all books paid for, things that you might need like a microscope, they would rent for you, and you got a stipend to live on.
Wow.
And I said, wow, that's not a bad deal.
So like the high-class 5220 club we had.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, this is kind of well, what's the downside?
Yeah, okay.
So, well, the downside is, time after you're done. I said, well, that's fine, To be a physician, you need to go through medical school 4 years, and then you can't just set up shop and be a doctor. You have to at least do an internship, and then most of the time, depending on what you go into, and I happen to do general surgery and then a year of colorectal surgery, that was 6 years after medical school. And so your payback to the military does not include any training years. They want you, and rightly so, as a trained physician. Mm-hmm. So I knew that all going into the decision-making process. And I said, yeah, I always had a fondness in my heart for the military because of my dad. My dad, he was the oldest of 5. His father died at age 12. And it was in the years where money was tough. And he, growing up in the same town that I did, realized that, there's not a lot of outs here. And it was just before World War II had officially started in the United States, as he said, because it was going on in Europe.
Yeah.
And so I guess he saw the writing on the wall, and he said, this could be my way out. And he quit high school, actually at age 17, and enlisted in the Navy. And so, his younger 2 brothers, so it was 3 boys and then 2 girls. Again, he was the oldest at 12, no father. Eventually, he joined, and then his younger brother, my uncle Fred, joined us in the Seabees.
Good man.
Yeah,
good man.
Absolutely. And then the third in line, Paul, was in, I guess would be the Army Air Corps, Air Force. And so, my dad had fond memories of the service, his times and his stories. It was just great as a kid to hear those. And it did well for him because he ended up coming back on a GI Bill and ended up going to St. Bonaventure University and eventually worked for the railroad, but he got an education and, again, fond memories. And so having that in my mind, I said, well, I'm looking at doing this military thing, and of course, he was just all for it.
Good.
On the other hand, my mother, I love her dearly, was, as a mother would be. I don't know, Brian. This is a little risky stuff here. I don't know if. And Vietnam had already happened and was over, but that's in your mind. She goes, we can get you through this. Well, the short story is, I said, no, I'm gonna do this. Now, what branch?
Yeah,
because
that was a big one.
Army, Air Force, and Navy has the same programs, and the scholarship is you choose the branch and then you apply, and then it was fairly selective. They wanted to make sure, obviously, you were a good risk for them.
Oh yeah.
And so I said, well, I don't like to hunt particularly. I don't like to camp. I love the beach and I love the ocean. And my dad, so Navy, that's the way it's going to be. I'm going to go in the Navy.
Good rationale.
So I signed up for the Navy, and as I said, I finished college in 1979. I got my acceptance letters to Hahnemann. I chose to go there. I signed up for the scholarship. I swore in, and I started medical school in '79. Medical school is 4 years. The scholarship program was fantastic because I could just concentrate on learning to be a doctor.
Okay.
I didn't have to work a job at night.
No conflicts.
I didn't have to skimp on books. I could get the books that I needed and do it. In the scholarship program, the military is quite nice. They like you to do 45 days of active duty each year during medical school. If it doesn't work with your medical school, it's okay. I wanted to do it because then I was single, and it's like, this is an adventure.
Paid vacation. Oh.
Paid vacation. So my first summer, they require you to do what would be basic training, but it's not really basic training like my dad had or you had.
Boot camp, you mean?
Boot camp, yeah. And so our boot camp, it was called Officer Indoctrination School, OIS. 45 days in Newport, Rhode Island. Fantastic, fantastic. So I go there in my summer after my first year, and it's basically, they're taking folks that have already got their commission and trying to explain to them how you wear a uniform, how you salute.
Oh, the good stuff.
All that. I mean, there's still some, physical therapy, physical fitness and so forth. We did it alongside of the OCS folks, the officer candidate students, which they didn't have a commission. They needed to get through this or they could be, basically released. So I kind of felt a little guilty because I'd already had my commission, but it was fantastic. I loved Newport. I had made some great friends. My roommate was a pharmacist, actually. And I had, other than knowing my dad's stories, I had no military bearing. I didn't know how to really put on a uniform. I didn't know how to shine my shoes. I didn't know how the military etiquette, the chain of command, and so forth. And that was the duty. That was the job during this 45 days. It was fantastic. I loved it. Newport in the summer on the government. That was my first experience. They line you up just like anybody else. You line up and you go here. Everybody waits in line, sees the dentist. Everybody waits in line, gets the immunization. Everybody waits in line and gets your uniform issue and so forth.
Any special things that stand out when you were going through your 45 days, or things that were out of the ordinary that are
Yeah, I
interesting?
can tell you some funny stories because, you're there. I don't know what's going on. I tell my dad these things, and I said, geez, Dad, I saw this guy walking along. I'm an ensign at this point, so I got one stripe.
Okay.
I see these guys walking down with these beautiful uniforms with these 4 gold hash marks.
Oh.
I'm thinking, wow, this guy is really up there, and I'm, all over. And I didn't realize after the course that I actually outranked.
Yeah, he was
these
probably
guys.
a chief or something.
He's a chief or master chief with, 4, I guess they're good conduct, hash marks, gold.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow.
4 years gold.
It's amazing, though, how soon you learn who really runs the Navy.
Oh, yeah.
And it's these senior chiefs and master chiefs. So that and the camaraderie, you could just feel it. Everybody helping each other out with the same mission. Everybody needs to get through this, and not everybody might be in shape. My roommate was a pharmacist, and he had been, a bit older than the most of us, and working with him was like, you got to pass this physical fitness testing, you got to run a certain amount, which, it's great. That's what the military wants, soundness of mind and body.
Yeah.
So anyway, 45 days, great experience. You had a graduation at the end. Good friends, and as you well know, and most people in the service know, the friends that you make, even in a short period of time, get to be very close friends.
Oh, yeah.
And you run into them again, the good Lord above, he puts people in front of you that you end up seeing later and later, and it's just a wonderful experience. So that was the first. And then after that, during medical school, I was very fortunate, and I was able to do 45 days at the Naval Hospital in Philadelphia, not too far from where I was. I did 45 days at San Diego Naval Hospital as a medical student in Balboa, and 45 days of active duty at Bethesda. And so after medical school, then you need to decide what type of physician you're going to be. And so I wanted to be a surgeon, and so again, and people need to know this up front, and I did, and that is, when you sign up for a program like this, you still are subject to the Navy's needs. Mm-hmm. If you, for example, want to be a dermatologist, and the Navy says, well, we don't need dermatologists, but we need undersea medicine officers, then you may not be able to be a dermatologist until you fulfill your obligation. Yeah. Okay. And so, and I knew that going in, and I was perfectly willing to be flexible about that. And so, but fortunately, I was, it's kind of interesting because the military, again, picks and chooses who they want for their training. Mm-hmm. And I ended up doing my internship at Bethesda Naval Hospital. And that's your year after medical school. Everybody's required to do an internship someplace. My internship year was from 1983 through 84. So I shipped out to Bethesda. Now, the way it works, you start off medical school as an ensign. When you graduate from medical school, you jump to a lieutenant. So somehow you jump lieutenant grade. Yeah, you jump.
Full stripe.
Yes, 2 full stripes. That's just the way it works. And it's
good.
Across the board, Army, Air Force has the same rules. And by the way, the scholarships are the same too, same money and same programs. So I graduate from medical school. I immediately go to Philadelphia to the recruiting area, and I get my 2 stripes. And I report to Bethesda Naval Hospital, do my internship. The way the Navy works is most people after an internship year, because you can't practice medicine until you at least do what's called an internship year after medical school. Most of those folks end up going on a ship as a general medical officer or with the Marines or even some stateside duty. So you're kind of like a general medical officer, and the Navy has those needs.
Question, I'm interrupting, but
sure,
your training, Did you ever have the feeling that you or some of the other guys were being what they call fast-tracked? For some reason, they just seemed to stand out, and they were not pull or push, but they were given a little bit extra challenge to show off.
Possibly.
Okay.
At that point, I didn't sense that, but I think what happens is, and what I know now, of course, is there's constantly teams looking at future needs.
Yeah, okay.
Future needs. So they say, and this comes up actually, because again, the training, it's pretty, you can predict. Internship year, you're going to go with the Marines for a year, you're going to go on a ship for a year, and then come back into general surgery training for the next 4 years.
Okay.
That's pretty much, or you might, some people choose to do flight surgery or undersea medicine, which is a 3-year stint. Now those are payback years too, because you're now not in a training billet, whatever. So I, again, single at the time, said, you know, and my senior folks would say, be as specific as possible, and you often get what you want.
Yeah.
And so I said, I want to get on a supply ship, because I knew the supply ships are going to go into the Mediterranean, into the Caribbean. And they're going to be port to port. They're not the big carriers where they have to be anchored off. You're going to go right port side. And so I researched it out, and I found out what are the 3 supply ships that are going to need a general medical officer. And I found out that the Sylvania was one. I put in for the Sylvania, and I got that. So I'm all set to go on the Sylvania for a year. It was going to go into the Caribbean. It's going to go to the Med. And then I got a letter saying, we need more surgeons than we can train at Bethesda. We're offering you the option to go off and do general surgery training in a civilian institution, not do the GMO year, general medical officer year, and then so you can go right into surgery if you want. So, just as you said, they knew that they needed more surgeons than they can physically train. The military could train their own surgeons at Bethesda, Portsmouth, Oakland at the time, and San Diego. They needed more than they could physically train, so they needed some to go out in the civilian sector. Yeah. So I thought about it. I said, geez, you know, this Sylvania thing would be a great thing.
Yeah.
But surgery training is a long time. And if I'm getting an opportunity to do that, and I had an option to go back to the Guthrie Clinic, my hometown, great surgical training program, a lot like the Berkshire Medical Center here, actually. And so the short story to that is, I said, fine, I'm going to go on and do my surgical training and not go out on the Sylvania. And again, I believe in divine intervention, and the good Lord placed my wife in front of me when I was an intern at Bethesda Naval Hospital. My wife, his name is Sue Johnson, a nurse trained in Minnesota. She was a nurse at Bethesda when I was doing my internship. She and her friend from Minnesota, Marla Sanvey, joined the Navy to get out of Minnesota, I think. And
yeah, the cold winters.
Yeah, the cold winters. And so we had met there and fell in love, got married. She did her 3 years at Bethesda. We got married after she was done. And I was at my general surgery training program in the civilian world at the Guthrie Clinic. So this would be now, I finished in '84, it would be '85. It's now 4 more years past the internship, so I was in the civilian hospital for 4 years, becoming a general surgeon, with the idea that I would become back on active duty after my training. My wife finished her time. She joined me, I guess it would have been in '85, after we got married, soon after that. And we had our first 2 children when I was in my general surgery training program. My oldest is Karin, C-A-R-I-N, a nice Scandinavian name.
Yeah, those.
And Matthew is my second in line. Matthew and Karin were both born while I was training as a general surgeon in Pennsylvania. And so as I finished that, in surgery, you have then the option of doing subspecialty training. You could be a heart surgeon, a plastic surgeon, a pediatric surgeon. I chose the area of what's called colorectal surgery. It's 1 additional year of training, and it involves, you know, colon cancer and diverticulitis and doing colonoscopies. It was a nice extra year of training. The Navy allowed me to do that too before going back on active duty, because again, their needs. They knew the projected needs for this specialty.
No, they're planning.
Yeah. They're planning. And so again, a divine intervention, I was allowed to do that. I went to Houston to do that at the University of Texas. That was in the years '88, '89. So '83, '84, active duty at Bethesda, out civilian training, Houston for colorectal. And now we have the 2 children, Karin and Matt, with us. Now I'm getting ready to do my payback time. I need my assignment. So I'm in Houston wondering, you know, where are they going to send me? I'm a trained general surgeon and colorectal surgeon. Usually subspecialty trained surgeons, they wanted a larger facility.
Yeah.
So at the time, there was Oakland, San Diego, Bethesda, and Portsmouth, the big 4 naval hospitals. And they each had a colorectal surgeon, so I'm telling my wife, I don't know where they're going to send me. And my detailer said, well, we're not sure yet. It may be Yokosuka, Japan, or it may be Jacksonville. And I said, well, I don't care as long as they have, you know, a colonoscope, basically, is an instrument that I use. I want to be able to use what my training is.
Okay, it makes sense.
And so time was wearing on, and I was getting close to my training ended in June of 1989, and I hadn't heard from the detailer. I was like, what's going on here? You know, I need to know so I can arrange my move. Finally, you know how it is. You call, and I get, you know, some petty officer, and he says, oh, I have your orders right here.
Yeah, come and pick them up.
And I was like, well, where are they? They're to Bethesda Naval Hospital. I said, Bethesda Naval Hospital? They didn't tell me that. But, you know, my wife and I met there. I did my training there. It's a great place. It's the President's Hospital.
Yahweh had you in his sights.
Absolutely. I firmly believe that. And so I said, could you fax those over to me? Because I wanted them in hand.
Yeah.
Once you get it in hand. She did, and I had it. I told my wife, and we're like, wow, this is great. And not only that, typically they only give you 1-year orders, because then it's flexible for them where they could send you after that. Well, I got 3-year orders to Bethesda.
To one spot.
To one spot. And I was like, wow, this is great. And it's a great facility. It's, you know, as I said, it's the President's Hospital. It's a great place to go. So that's where I went. I went to Bethesda. I reported in there. And it's interesting because, you know, as we talk about comrades and friends, we started out, my interns at Bethesda, we started together. Most of them did that other route, the GMO year on a ship, come back, do general surgery, then out on a carrier, because that's typically, before you can do subspecialty, you go out as a surgeon. Well, I came back, now I'm doubly trained, and some of those folks that started with me were still in training.
Oh.
And so it was kind of a little tricky, because I was technically superior to them in my training. But again, in the military, people get along, we work together well. And so I got reported on active duty in '89, and of course, you're assigned to a stateside facility, but you always have another job. And most of the staff at Bethesda Naval Hospital's other job is to man the hospital ship, the Comfort, USNS Comfort. It's a big, you know, it's a 1,000-bed university hospital floating on a super tanker. There's 2 hospital ships that the military has, the Mercy on the West Coast and the Comfort on the East Coast. So most people get that as their other job, their other, you know, in a deployment situation. Well, I was assigned to an MMART team, and an MMART team, if I can remember, something rapid, one of these mobile rapid advancement teams. It's basically a team where you're assigned to a group of Marines. When the Marines go, they want their medical assets. So, so I'm the surgeon assigned to an MMART team. I was like, well, what does that mean? And you get some training for that. Well, of course, this is in '89, and I start in, and you know, I like teaching, and so I was assigned as the training officer for Bethesda, and again, you know, we train medical students and residents there. So I'm there not a year, well, almost a year, I guess, when the first Gulf War happened, and this was August of 1900, right? No.
Not 1900,
no, sorry.
We weren't there then.
89 to 90, 1990,
okay, I'll buy
August
that.
of 90. Yeah. Someone will probably correct me on these dates.
Yeah, at least they know who's listening to the show.
Exactly, exactly. And at the time, so we had Carnes, the oldest, then Matthew. Well, Tim came along, our third in line. He was born and was not quite a year yet when Kuwait was invaded by Iraq. And so the Marines were mobilized. The hospital went on alert very quickly, as everybody knows about the first Gulf War. Things happened quickly. Assets built up. Troops got sent over. It's amazing how quickly things happen. Of course, medical assets go too. And so most of the staff ended up going on up into Baltimore, where the Comfort was on station, getting the Comfort geared up, ready to go over to supply a hospital ship for the conflict. I was called on a Sunday morning, 5 days after Kuwait was invaded, that my job was going to be with the Marines. And so my wife, Sue, Karen and Matt and Tim was not even a year, said goodbye and flew down to Camp Lejeune, and I had met up with the rest of the team that was being assembled. And this was on a Sunday. Again, here I am joining the Navy because I like beaches, the ship. I don't like to hunt. I don't like to camp per se. I like air conditioning,
Oh.
And so
The
I
roughing it.
miscalculated one thing. I didn't realize that the Navy takes care of the Marines.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And I said, in retrospect, I can say it was the best experience. I love the Marines. I'll always have a soft place in my heart for the Marines, and to this day. And so they were my patients at this point. So I'm with a group. There's orthopedic surgeon, there's anesthesia, there's nurses, there's psychiatrists. We're all part of it. I'm a general and colorectal surgeon. The next day, in typical military fashion, load us on a bus. We're going to go out on the USS Guam. It's a landing platform, Hilo, LPH. It's basically a big flat-top ship loaded with Marines, their supplies, and helicopters to get it as close as they can to the conflict and offload by helicopter. So the amphibious force, again, what do I know about this? I thought ships were battleships and cruisers and all that. Well, there's an amphibious side of the Navy, too, that most, and your generation knows very well.
Amen.
And, you know, the ships are literally painted green and blue. The green side's where the Marines take care of, and the blue side of the Navy takes care of.
I mean, right, but were you assigned as a MFF, you know, Fleet Marines?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Now,
I wish I could remember all the acronyms. It was part of the Fleet Marines, and as BSS G4 or something, whatever that stands for, battalions. So the bottom line is my superior. Now at this point, I should say that I'm a lieutenant commander now.
Ooh.
When I finish, and again, it's in the medical side, it's automatic. I finished my general surgery training, automatically lieutenant commander. So that's 5 years after I've been a lieutenant commander. So I go in as a lieutenant commander. Part of this group, you know, we wore the Marine uniform. We were on the green side of the ship. We were the Marines' asset. The ship had its own assets, but we're basically embarked on that ship. So, but we get to the Guam. We all load on. There probably, in our group, there's probably 50 medical people. Well, we're sitting. They don't have berthing for us all. So they start announcing names, and I'm one of them. Sorry, you'll have to leave. Get your,
And pack and go.
Yeah, you get your pack in, and I'd say, I went with, I don't know what to bring. This, who knows what to bring? I brought one textbook with me, because I do know that whatever you bring, you carry. So I brought my textbook, and you get there, and of course they give you everything else. And I'll never forget, it was Sergeant Thibodeau. That Sunday before we left, he takes me over and issuing me my equipment. And I was like, okay.
You get sidearms, or was you?
He's giving me, well, first, the flak jacket.
Yeah.
I'm starting to get real nervous now. I'm like, I'm a
Guy
surgeon.
gets hurt out there.
Yeah. And give me a shelter half. I'm like, what's that? That's half a tent. Oh. And then trenching tool.
Oh, you
Trenching
didn't
tool.
take field training when you were in the Marines?
No training. Which it totally goes against typical thing.
Yeah.
You usually get trained. Well, we got to remember, I'm on active duty just a year, and this thing happened quickly. And so I learned on the job, basically. And then I go to the armory. Sergeant Thibodeau gives me my 9mm Beretta. Weapon? I don't hunt. Doc, this can save your life. So I get my Beretta. Of course, no ammunition or anything. So then I've got all this stuff, and I'm thinking, wake me up. What's going on here? I'm the guy that doesn't like to hunt. So the next day, we get on the Guam. There's not enough room. We get off, go back to Lejeune, because the ships go out of Morehead City, which is where the ships come in. The next day, we get on another bus, and this time we're on the Iwo Jima, LPH-2. That's going to be my home now for the next 6.5 months.
That was a biggie.
Yeah, the same size as the Guam, LPH-2, because LPH-1, which was also the Iwo Jima, when it was launched, the tradition goes, and it's probably may not be accurate, had problems, had to be brought back in, refitted, and went out again as the LPH-2 Iwo Jima. Iwo Jima, actually, that ship has a lot of history, interesting history. It was the ship that evacuated the Marines from Beirut after that bombing. It had experience in Vietnam and some other things. And so it was an old ship.
Oh, it was 32 years when they decommissioned it.
Yeah, very old. No air conditioning didn't work well. Water system wasn't good. It's not like a brand new carrier with reactors where you got plenty of, desalinated water. Anyway, it was our home. So we get there, and it was like, we're the Marines. The Marines get all their green side. Well, there's myself, a pediatrician, who in conflict, a pediatrician becomes basically, a battalion aid surgeon, Band-Aid on, chest tubes, emergency stuff. Brian Kraft Jacobs. Again, these get to be your close friends. I had a nurse anesthetist, an OR nurse, all as roommates. Actually, there were 5 of us in the beginning. And so, no berthing. So they find this one staging area on the ship on the level just below the flight deck, near one of the passageways to get up to the flight deck. And it was in bad, it needed repairs. There were wires hanging from the ceiling, but there was 3 bunks on this side and 2 bunks on this side and 2 desks. That's where you guys
That was you needed, yeah.
That's it, fine. We get in there, what do I know? Again, it turns out that where this room was strategically located, we had control of the air conditioning duct. It was ours, and then it fed the rest of the part of the ship. And all this part of the ship is the Marines. And you know, they had their pre-flight areas and stuff. And so when it got hot, and it did, 100 degrees, we could open up our vent, and it basically, we got air conditioning, and it probably stole from the rest that going down.
Bleeding it off.
Bleeding it off. And I can remember, boom, 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 boom. Turn it down, open up. We're not getting any air conditioning down on our side. Oh, yeah, it's hot in here, too. Close the door, open it back up. So it turned out that what looks like going to be a horrible place to live was a good place. Yeah. And we weren't under, so you're under the flight deck. Many rooms are under where the chains are. You know, they're moving aircraft. We had CH-53s. Well, these are helicopters.
Oh, okay.
So CH-53, the big helicopters, helicopters are touching down, chains, blocks. We were in an area that wasn't directly under that, and we were just above the bake shop. So what looks like a bad thing, and this is, I'm sure everybody can tell these stories in the military, may not always be a bad thing, and it worked out great. So that was our place to live for 6.5 months, good friends. As you know, so what happened is Desert Shield happens, and it was amazing. We go out and meet up with a force coming in from, I believe it was Guam. There was, I think, 36 or 37 amphibious ships that all met of various types, LSTs. You know, again, this is the Marines getting their supplies and equipment to shore. We had helicopters to bring things in. The LSTs go in, drop the front end, tanks go off. You know, again, this is stuff you guys all know from your generation. The LCACs, so the flood, the well deck, and these hovercrafts go in, all ways of getting Marines in. Our job would be helicopters would go off. We had 3,000 Marines. They'd go off, they'd secure the beachhead, they'd come back, they'd get the next wave of Marines, and then as they come back, they bring casualties. So our first area is we triage and treat injuries on the hangar deck, which is below the flight deck. And then once the beachhead is secure, our team goes to shore and just kind of follows along as the Marines go. That's sort of the strategy behind how medical assets follow.
Well, it's not like a MASH unit? Or?
Yeah. Well, it's a mobile unit. Okay. Everything we bring. And so, of course, we're with the combat engineers because they have all the equipment, and my superior officer, Major McGuire, great guy, he looked like the Incredible Hulk. He's like, Doc, he goes, I don't really want to take care of you guys, but you fall under my purview. Yeah. Just don't get me into trouble, and I'll take care of you. And he did. Yeah, Major McGuire took care of us the whole time. And so this is August. You know, as you know, it was basically making circles in the water because Desert Shield was happening. We were hoping Saddam Hussein would just say, "That's it. We're not going to do anything." It's all, you know. We didn't have much contact with it. It's not like it is now. There's no email. We had a ham radio on the ship that maybe you could call back and talk to your spouse or your kids, you know, and let them know what's going on, or at least that you're okay. But, you know, mail call was, in the beginning, you don't get much. So you're fairly isolated, but, you know, we would hear intel reports every night, what's going on, and we'd be like, let's just get this thing over with. It's months you're sitting out here doing nothing but making circles in the water. And, you know, we went across the Atlantic Ocean. We went through the Straits of Gibraltar, went through the Mediterranean. Actually, an interesting story, too, because I told you about this Beretta. You know, I'm scared to death I'm going to lose this thing because it's like, you know, you can't lose a weapon. You're registered with this thing. So finally, after you get to know people, I went to the colonel who was in charge of all the Marines. I said, you know, if I got this thing, maybe I ought to learn how to shoot it. Yeah. So in the Med, he puts up, he has some target practice, and he shows me how to shoot this Beretta on some target practice. I'm like, okay, fine, that's enough for me. So then we go through the Suez Canal, which was an experience because, again, you didn't know what was happening. It's a vulnerable spot. You're on high alert. Go through the Suez, go through the Red Sea, and then we're in the Persian Gulf making circles. Occasionally, the Marines were training the whole time. They were doing flight operations, training these pilots how to take off the ship with Humvees and land them back on the ship. They're going into Yemen and some other areas. And you know, it's getting kind of boring, so I'm trying to figure out what I can do. And so I'd see sick call and, you know, these are healthy people in general, but you still, you know, some appendectomies and some other minor surgeries that
Did you ever do any humanitarian work, if you will, civilians, or weren't they allowed aboard?
Not at this point, because we could not even do elective surgery. We need to keep all of our assets for who knows when this war is going to break out. You couldn't, that's not the term waste, but you couldn't use your precious assets for anything. You wanted to keep everything you had when this war was going to break out, because no one knew. You know, when quite honestly, most of us were concerned about chemical and biologic weapons being launched at us.
Yeah, well, Hassam did a lot of it.
He did, and he had that capability, and many ships are ready for it. The Iwo Jima wasn't ready for it. I mean, you could literally see cracks in the hull, you know, the light coming in. This is not going to seal up when there's a cloud coming overhead. And, you know, we had our training, we had our MOP gear, whatever that stands for. It's the, you know, charcoal embedded suits and the hoods and the rubber gloves and your auto injectors for anecdotes. And all I can remember is we're the medical folks. We put these on. How are we going to take care of patients like this? But we had our drills. We drilled all the time, mass casualty drills and so forth. So anyway, this goes on, and finally the air war started, and then the ground war happened, and it's all over. In between all that time, the Iwo Jima actually had an accident. We, an old ship, we were having some boiler problems, and so we pulled into Bahrain. Bahrain was sort of the NATO base back then. That's where, you know, ships from all the NATO forces would come and do whatever they need to do and then leave. So we went into Bahrain. It was supposed to be a 3-day repair, and of course at this point we're all like, yes, great, you know. And I would be like, oh, I'm the medical guy. I got to go in and get some supplies, and Major McGuire would say, okay, fine, but, you know.
Come back.
Yeah, make sure you get yourself back.
Yeah.
So, you know, and we're tooling around, and we finally get in a chance to maybe get a beer or something like that. So we get into town and do some things, and 3 days, back on the ship, we're going out of the harbor, and, you know, I'm in the rack because, you know, day, night, doesn't matter. I'm sleeping, and we you know, go dead in the water. Lights out, general quarters. You know, we were doing drills throughout, but you could tell in the voice of the guy on the 1MC, this is not a drill.
It ain't no drill.
This ain't not a drill. And so, you know, we've been trained. You know, my station was the main medical area, so I'm running down the passage thinking, I thought the war had started. I thought we were hit with something, the war started. I literally get down to the medical spaces, and it's obviously we had an explosion in an engine room. And they're bringing this guy, and the engine room was actually below medical. They're bringing a guy up who was literally boiled. I mean, and he was alive, steam, superheated steam. There was, I believe, 12 in the engine spaces. The short story again is 8 died instantaneously, 4 made it to our medical spaces alive, but literally boiled. And so we did the proper things to resuscitate them. We put breathing tubes in, IV lines and catheters in. We had our own assets, helicopters. We immediately got these 4 transferred to the hospital ship, Comfort, where my colleagues from Bethesda were. And I went with them on the helicopter as well as some other folks. And they ended up dying within 8 hours because it's superheated steam. Yeah. The story was there was a problem with the main valve. And it went in to get repaired, and somehow what do I know? It's just hearsay again. The wrong bolts were put on the wrong nuts were put on the wrong bolts. When it got up to the right heat, the changes in thermodynamics, the nuts blew off, the valve blows open. This space, which is probably about the size of the studio, is filled with superheated steam. Not much you can do. And so, of course, we went dead in the water, got towed back to Bahrain. This is before the air war had started, and we ended up being there over a month. And, you know, and the CNN's covering all this. Word gets back, the explosion on the Iwo Jima, 8 dead, and, you know, you got to call your families and stuff. But we ended up being in for repairs a long time, a month and a half, you know, welded to the pier in Bahrain. It gave me the opportunity, however, to touch base with a lot of NATO forces and medical assets. I mean, I sipped wine on the fantail of a French frigate because they all have alcohol on board. So you get to go.
And not medical alcohol.
No. And they get the rations, you know, back in the day of, what was it, Admiral Grog or whatever. They still do that. British ships, they'll have your rations.
The ration of grog?
The U.S. Navy is the only one that got rid of the rations.
No, but they still know how to drink.
Oh, yeah, yeah. You can
I remember that.
You can have, what is it, after 2 months of consecutive sea duty with no port call, they break out beer day. You have a picnic on board. We had a couple of those. But anyway, so again, it was a tough time. It was very hard psychologically for a lot of folks on the ship. And, you know, at this point in time, we hadn't really experienced much of a war and conflict. And so we get repaired, and then we go back and join the rest of the crew, and the air war started, the ground war happened. Fortunately, you know, the Marines came in from the south. We went in, and I remember this too, as the ground war started, they line up all the ships, the amphibious ships, to do what's called a feint, to look like all the Marines are coming in from the sea, and all the forces, this is what, again, is told to me, because we're part of the intelligence, are focused on the sea, and the Marines come in from the ground, and everybody surrendered. And so we didn't really have to do an amphibious landing. But as we went in, side by side, through the channel where the minesweepers have cleared, I remember being up on the deck, and I say, boy, am I glad we're not the first ship. And, you know, and a seasoned sailor next to me said, Doc, you don't understand. These mines are timed to go off.
Yeah.
2, 3 ships go by, then it goes. I was like, oh, thanks for telling me that.
What time is it?
Yeah, exactly. So they go off based on 1 ship, 2 ship, 3, and then clog the channel. But so all in all, minimal casualties, obviously, from that war. The war's over, and I go back to Bethesda. I have my other active duty years there. We have 1 more child born while I was at Bethesda, Kristen, who's now a senior in high school.
Ooh.
We left, I got out, so when I came time to, my obligations done, this is in '93, I liked the military. I really did. My wife was a Navy nurse. She understood military life. She understood my passion for it. But I didn't like the disruption in the deployments. And I'd done my time, and I said, you know, I'm going to take a civilian job. I came to University of Massachusetts where I could teach, this is in Worcester, and live in a small town and do my specialty of colorectal surgery. So I started at UMass. I never resigned my commission. I didn't start drilling there because I was the only colorectal surgeon. I figured, you know, if I get deployed, I mean, you can always be called off into active duty, even on a non-drilling unit, but it's less likely than if you're in a drilling unit. And so I kept my commission, but I didn't drill. We had 2 more children there, so we have 6 total, Natalie and Veronica. Karen, the oldest, is now, how old's Karen? 23. I'm happy to say that she is in a maritime force, but it's not the Navy. She's at the Coast Guard Academy in New London. So Karen is a senior there, and I'm very impressed with the Coast Guard. I can say that as a Navy guy. I didn't really realize. We took care of the coasties too, in the medical side, but it's a really neat service. So she'll finish there. Matthew, who now is in college in Minnesota, is thinking about medicine. Tim, the next in line, he was 8 months before when I went into the first Gulf War. He just joined the Navy, enlisted. Oh. He's waiting to go in as an aviation mechanic. Kristen and Natalie and Veronica are all 3 at home with us at St. Peter Marian High School.
Good.
So we do have some tradition moving along here. My dad, Navy, me, and then Karen, Coast Guard, and Tim, Navy. And who knows, if Matt decides to go into medical school, my father's already like, Matt, you got to do the same thing as your dad. You go in the Navy and be a Navy doc.
Yeah.
But when I stayed at UMass in Worcester until '99, and at that point, the real answer is I needed a partner. I was very busy surgically, and my chairman of surgery at that point had other interests, and I got offered a job at the University of Minnesota. My wife's from Minnesota. It's a great place to train the specialty that I do. So I went there in '99. When I got to Minnesota, a recruiter gets a hold of me and said, you know, you got partners now. Why don't you get in a drilling unit? So I did. I started off in a drilling unit. It's, you know, they said, you can go to Bethesda. And at this point, I still do have, my comrades are still at Bethesda, the ones that decided to stay in and make a career out of the Navy. The chief of surgery there, he was an intern with me. And so I said, that's not a bad deal. So to this day, I'm still in this reserve unit where I go to Bethesda Naval Hospital. with the staff who I helped train. It's a great opportunity for me to actually do what I do in the civilian life, in the military. After 9/11, I did get mobilized to backfill Bethesda. The comfort went out again. The staff at the hospital is decimated, and so I was mobilized to go what's called backfill. The hospital still needs to run, and so I was there at that time. That's when I had gotten mobilized out of the reserves. But at this point, where I'm at is almost 6 years of active duty, and I'm at combining active and reserves. I'm at 19. So next year, the good Lord willing, I can get my 20 years in. But you know,
when did you get your 4th stripe?
Oh, that's an interesting story, too.
I thought it might be.
You know, again, so I'm at this, I had gone to Minnesota. The recruiter says, you know, you ought to drill. I'm like, yeah, that'd be good. I'd like to drill. You know, I have friends, and so they got a sweet deal to go to Bethesda. So I started drilling. Well, I drilled a year, and you know, I had moved different places. We lived in a temporary house in Minnesota, and then built a house actually. And so I get this letter, or a certified letter from the Navy. And at this point, I'm a commander. So I made commander right when I was getting out of my commitment. Mm-hmm. And so I'm a commander, and so I get this letter in, I guess it was 2001 or whatever it was, addressed to Captain William Sweeney. Captain, I'm thinking I'm getting a certified letter saying, hey, congratulations, you made captain. Well, the letter said, due to your failure of compliance with our central credentialing program, you are now being kicked out of your drilling unit, basically, and put into the non-drilling unit. I'm thinking, my non-compliance with credentialing, what are they talking about? And captain, when did I make captain? And your failure to communicate with us. So they've been sending letters to this old house, which I never received. And so I get this letter saying that to me as a captain, which I didn't even know I got promoted, and we're throwing you out of the active unit. So I'm like, well, whatever. So I just didn't do anything. And then I got a call from a Captain Frost out of the Pentagon saying, you know, Brian, they should have never did this. We really want you to stay in drilling. Why don't you get back in drilling? In fact, there's a bonus offered for getting back in. I'm like, you know,
sign up bonus.
Yeah,
huh?
so I ended up going in a short, like 11 months of not. But then since that time, I've been in that same drilling unit. And then I got mobilized following that. And so I'd made captain during that little interlude. And, you know, as I tell everybody, captain's nice because you get a parking spot now when you're at the exchange. You know, other than that, I don't know. And the pay. So that's sort of, that's a lot. I don't know.
You've been around here and there.
And it's still, again, a soft spot in my heart. And you just look at the caliber of who we have joining the armed forces. I'm telling you, these are dedicated men and women.
Amen.
You know, it's you ask about, you know, how do you feel about it? You know, and I'll be perfectly honest with people. I joined the Navy for money, to get my medical school paid for. That's why I joined. It wasn't patriotic. I mean, I have patriotism, but that wasn't the driving force. I needed a way to pay for medical school. But I'm telling you, now, it's not for everybody. You know, what people don't understand is, when you hear people that aren't really have a good impression about the military, it's like, you know, you just need to be a part of it for a while. Yeah. No place is, you know, nirvana, but it's people help each other, you work with each other, you make friends that last forever. You know, it's not all about killing and rampaging and destroying. It's security and peace, and have the privilege of providing medical assets. You know, and I tell people, I'm on the Iwo Jima, and I'm seeing these 18-year-olds that are willing to die. I mean, truly willing to die for the freedoms that we all, you know, take for granted. It's like, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
So.
Now I'm going to change gears a minute. We have a couple of goodies here that Brian brought along. Just happen to have them. I'm going to hold them up, Red. You get a good zip on them, and then I'd like you to kind of walk us through, if you will.
Sure, sure.
Down memory lane. Let me know if I do it right so we don't get a splash. There we go. Okay.
Yeah, so this is basically the overhead shot of Bethesda Naval Hospital. And as memory lane, as you say, it is, because this is the area where I met my wife. I did my internship at this complex. It's in Bethesda, Maryland. It is the area where the hospital where 2 of my children were born. It's where I did my payback time and I still go there for my reserve time. And so it has a lot of sentimental value. And currently right now it's an area where a lot of our injured sailors and Marines are being brought back and taken care of. And it's amazing the evacuations that occur nowadays. I mean, an injury in the field can be back at this institution in 5 days, which I think is comforting for our servicemen and their families to know that they're getting back to a wonderful a place for their medical care. But this is sort of the tower, and that's sort of the original hospital that was built, and there's all kinds of laughs you can have about that because it's not a really good design for a hospital.
Oh.
It's you know, it's not big, and elevators, and it's mainly offices and things now, and this is the newer hospital. The medical school is back here, the Uniformed Services University of Health Sciences, a top-notch facility where we're training military physicians, actually.
Good.
It's its own medical school. Yeah. And then, of course, as you leave, you get the picture and a lot of comments from your colleagues that, you know, you hopefully will make contacts with for the rest of your life.
And you look at the name and you all of a sudden, bingo.
Yeah, memories
You're right
come back.
back there.
In fact, this gentleman here, John DeNoble, is the chief of surgery at Bethesda right now, and he's a colleague of mine.
Good.
So,
Well, let's take, this is a rarity. That's the only way I can put it. And I will give you the honor of walking us through this. This is fun and games, but it's real serious at the same time.
yeah, because it's not an official recognition of duty that you might get in the military. Basically, this was put together by my colleagues, the corpsmen and the nurses that I worked with in the surgical clinic at Bethesda. And, you know, more so than the, you know, obviously you take any medals and honors and certificates that you might receive with a lot of seriousness, but this is especially serious because this was something that someone made, and you know, it takes some. And you can say it's, you know, of course, they use my middle name because it's not an official document. I was lieutenant commander. I was the chief of colorectal surgery there, which is here, and they took some pieces off of a colonoscope and drew that in and signed these things. And it says fair winds and following seas from the nursing staff in the general surgery clinic. Nursing staff also includes the corpsmen, and you know, that's the backbone. And to have someone take the time to do that really touches your heart, and so it does. And you wonder where some of these folks are. William Bell was a corpsman at the time, and you just wonder. But it was. It's just.
And it's a real good trip because you know the people really feel and meant that.
Correct.
Now, you touched on it, but all in all, is the experience that you've had with the government and the Navy and all that a positive or a negative impact as far as you're concerned? How did it impact your life and your livelihood?
Yeah, well, I guess
it's
you can.
It's a loaded question.
Yeah, it is. You can tell from my enthusiasm that it was a positive effect. As my dad would say, and you know, you end up being like Dad, the best years of my life, Brian, the best years of my life. They are good years. You know, and obviously sitting around here, and what do you remember? You remember the good stuff. Is there bad stuff? Of course there's bad stuff. In anything, in any job, in anything, and sometimes you can look back and laugh at the bad stuff. At the time, it's not so laughable, but you grow up, you really learn to get by with less, I would say, because, you know, I tell everybody, when they start complaining about not having enough administrative support or not having the right equipment to use in the operating room, I said, you know, everybody ought to spend, and actually I believe this, everybody ought to spend some time on active duty.
Amen.
I believe in, and my wife, who's, you know, a Navy nurse, we have 4 girls in our family, men and women alone. I think, you know, mandatory military service doesn't have to be in a combat scenario. Some support service would instill patriotism. It would benefit people in ways that you don't even understand until you live through it. So positive experience, recommend it to everybody. Honestly, I don't think it should be used as a, you know, you got a problem person, stick them in the military, let them straighten them out. That can go both ways. People need to know what they're getting into when they get into it. Having said that, there's a lot of opportunity to make a lot of good.
Amen.
Yeah.
Amen. Oh, thank you. And basically, that's the bottom line, folks. The tenet of this program is to try and get every guy and gal who did anything anywhere in the service, if they will, as Brian and all the others before him have done, to share the good, sometimes the bad, but more important, you had a job to do and you did it. You may not be Audie Murphy, you may not be Joe Foss or whoever your heroes are, but you were there and you had a notch to fill. It's a big puzzle. Every one of us is a piece in that puzzle. The more that we can fill with fact, the better the picture we'll have. But more important, our kids, our grandkids, and those people after us will be able to look at this and say, okay, I now have a better appreciation of what it is. And he said, it may be one of the best things you can do. But whatever it is, if you have that desire, it's the only way I can put it, please give us a call, come and see us. There's some paperwork, but we can take care of that. And then we'll have a good time together. Again, I thank you, my Lloyd.
Bob, thank you so much for all you're doing.
You're nice and warm still.
Yeah.
Thank you. Come and see us, folks. Bob Stevens saying thank you. I'll see you soon.